Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming today. I'm Barbara Davis. I'm the city historian for New Rochelle, and I'm also the co-director of the Westchester County Historical Society, which is the co-sponsor today. I have some brochures. I won't go into great depth, but I will tell you that we are one of the 10 oldest historical societies in the country, celebrating 150 years next year, but we're very young. We're very young. In fact, Joyce is one of our board members. So I will have some brochures if you'd like to take them. And I invite you to take a look at our website, westchesterhistory.com, and you can see all we offer. If you love history, you can scroll through over 90,000 images that are on our website, and they're all available to the public. So I am delighted to be here today and to have the privilege of introducing one of my favorite people. Joyce Cole is come down all the way from Ossining, where she is the municipal historian for the village of Ossining. They're so lucky to have her. Oh my God, she is like the Energizer Bunny. She does presentations, exhibits, she works with the school kids, and she's a real search angel, as they call, helping people find out their own family history. She's an expert researcher, sociologist, and storyteller. She's relevant and she's courageous. She's also incredibly passionate about the heritage of her native community of Ossining. So Joyce is an advocate for all people to learn about their family and local history, no matter who you are, as it fosters a better understanding of your own self and of your community. She earned her BS in organizational management from Mercy College and certification as a genealogical research from Boston University. She has used her training to explore many family trees, including her very own, which you're going to hear about. She's constantly helping others make their own discoveries, and that's why she's joined us today. So next month here in the library lobby, the New Rochelle Council on the Arts will be presenting a very comprehensive Black history exhibit called Tracing Our Roots, New Rochelle's Black History. It's going to reveal many aspects of our community's past that have gone unrecognized. We are also exploring family histories of longtime African-American families of New Rochelle. And my hope is that today's talk and the exhibit will foster even more family research, bolstering the African-American collections in the library's archives and the city's local history collection. And it will also bring about more revelations. So Joyce has curated a phenomenal exhibit in Ossining that I think was up 2 years ago, but still available online. She'll share more about that at the end, and the one she has coming up in Ossining for Black History Month. I'll also be here. She's going to have a lot of time. Her program's about an hour long, and then she's left a lot of time for questions and answers and can even give you a little bit of hands-on help. So please, let's give her a warm New Rochelle welcome. Joyce Cole.
Thank you, Barbara. It's hard listening about yourself. It feels weird. But hello to all of you. We're going to take a little journey. My presentation style is a little different. I like to be more relaxed because I want you to be relaxed. I want you to feel comfortable to ask questions. Sometimes these topics are hard, but we're going to get through it together. So, discovering your African-American heritage by building a tree. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was little, I wanted to know a lot, and no one wanted to tell me anything. So my 4th grade teacher gave an assignment. You're going to go home. You're going to ask your parents about your family. You're going to come back and you're going to present it to the class. I took it home to my dad. He ripped it in half. Stop asking me questions. So I asked my mom, okay, so dad ripped up my homework. My teacher's not going to believe it. I'm probably better off saying my dog ate it. But she says, well, we're from Ossining. So I said, so we're the only Black people in the world that didn't come from the South or Africa. Because she said, yeah, we're from Ossining. So from that point on, I was just like, okay, I go to school, told the teacher, she says, well, I never thought you'd find anything anyway. So you're going to go to the library, you're going to get a book on your favorite animal, and you're going to write about the animal. So while my classmates talked about their wonderful family, great lineage, I talked about the domestic cat. Now, today I am a cat lady. I do have a lot of cats, but I knew nothing about my family. And it did something to me. And I just, for the rest of the time until now, had no connection to history, didn't mean anything. I couldn't connect to it. And I knew absolutely nothing about myself other than the fact that we came from Ossining. So you see here the Chirac crest. So when you hear the name Chirac, when I went off to school at Temple University, I was in the visitor center getting a ticket going home, and the man didn't see me. My name is Joyce, not a very ethnic name, and Chirac. He never came out from behind. He said, "That's a good Irish name. Where is this Irish girl?" And I'm standing there and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm Irish. Like maybe I'm Irish. So he comes out and he just stands there. So I started grabbing onto little tidbits. Sounds Irish. Okay, I love Notre Dame, got a clatter ring. Maybe that's why my mom is very, very fair skinned. My aunt has freckles and she has strawberry blonde hair naturally. So now we have some explanation because no one told me anything. So I started to just grab onto whatever I could because as human beings, we want connection. We want to know who we are. So this is some of the things I came up with as a child that went up deep into adulthood. Chirac is an Irish name. We have a large percentage of Irish DNA, and that was just based on how the people in my family looked. I'm dark for my family. The rest of them are very fair skinned. Someone in the Chirac family had to rape an ancestor. That's why everyone else could almost pass for white. The Irish descent was because of slavery. We were owned by the Chirac family. Obviously, the name had to come from somewhere. And we were the only Black community in Austin, the family that had no Southern roots. It was so traumatizing. I watched all my friends go down south every summer, and I was stuck in Austin. I love Austin, but I was stuck there. So what questions do you have for yourself about your own family? What have you been holding on to since you were younger that you want answers for? How many people have watched Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates? And then the same people that have your hands up, how many of you thought you could do the same thing? Exactly. It's not just for stars. And the methods that he's using is not just for wealthy people. You can do this research on your own. So the first thing you're going to do is gather whatever you know. Grandma's story that she told, 90% of it is true, 10% was fabricated. She had to embellish so it was a better story. But in everything she told, there was a lot of truth. And however outlandish it sounds, I have proven some of the stuff my grandmother said that made absolutely no sense to me as a child was absolutely true. You're going to go in the closet. You're going to find everything. You're going to find birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates, divorce. I solved someone's family history. The man did not know his father's name, and the divorce decree was what gave him his dad's name. You're going to find everything, and everything is important, even if it makes no sense to you right now. And I actually had one of those documents that made absolutely no sense to me the day I found it at the County Historical Society, but because it said Chirac, I kept it. 1 year later, a gentleman was looking for his grandmother's name, and that was the document. Keep it. Every time you do this research, it's not always for you. It can be for somebody else. Sibling names, locations, where they live, where they worked, jobs held. Military records are amazing, especially if your relative served in the Civil War. These records will tell you everything, almost including who owned your family, if you were people of enslavement, because there are also people that were free people of color. Burial information, church information, and then talk with the elders. If you can do DNA, everyone, that's not their thing, but if someone's willing to, find the oldest person in your family to do it. And then do multiple people. We'll talk about that a little more later. So, what they call the African American brick wall is getting past 1870 in the US Census. So the US Census started in 1790, went until 1840, they only had the names of the household, the head of the house, which was a man, rarely was a woman. But if you saw yourself before 1870 and you were Black, that was an indication you were a free person of color. Before 1870, the census was every 10 years, would be 1860, we were enslaved. You weren't a person, you were an object, you were not recorded. And what I just said was a lie. I said you were not recorded in the census, but you were recorded. Your family was part of someone's wealth. They record their wealth. So we'll talk about how later you have to research the people that owned your family to find your family. When you're doing research as an African American, you're doing double the work. You're going to get to know the people that owned your family really well. So in 1850 and 1860, the federal government took a supplemental slave census, giving slave owner names. And then our families were hash marks. She might have been a girl, 18 to 25, might have been a male, 20 to 50. That's what we were, just hash marks. The people that made you were checks. The names of all free Blacks were included in the 1850 census and the 1860 census. That's how you would get an indication that you were a descendant of a free person of color. So I'll tell you a quick story. One of the men I researched, you gotta put your listening cap on and pay attention. It's a rocky ride. Grandma was a free person of color. Grandpa was a slave. Grandma rented grandpa. She bought grandpa in slavery and sent their kids out to pay off the debt. Did you follow? Grandma owned grandpa and paid taxes on him and used the kids to pay off the debt. Beginning in 1870, the census listed the names of all African Americans. You hear the end part of that? Americans. African descent, Americans now. Reconstruction was an amazing part of history, even though it's written as probably the most tumultuous, hard time of American history. That's because they want you to believe that, because that is a time where we were starting to establish ourselves as Americans. Black men were allowed to vote. Black men were in office. They hated that. But in that little period of time, that's before that brick wall, you can find some of the Black people in the Freedmen Bureau records, banking records, complaints. During Reconstruction, formerly enslaved people could complain about their former plantation owners. In my family, it was another man who was enslaved. He complained, he said, "Master is keeping us enslaved. He's keeping women and their children, but we heard we are free. But Master won't let us go. Could you please help us and come get us? But don't come get us until after the harvest." Did you hear that loyalty in the middle of slavery? I'm dropping everything. I don't care if it ever sprouts. I'm leaving. But they asked not to be picked up until after the harvest, but to please come help. I made this really important. So on my search, when I was trying to find my cousin, let me back up. My cousin told me we're having a family reunion. It will have a history component. We found out about our family. I was like, that's a lie. There's nothing. My teacher told me so. I'm in my 40s, by the way, when I'm saying this. There are times when you will revert back to being a child if someone has traumatized you. And He says, no, I have a document. So I said, where is this document? So he blew me off. He's one of my elder cousins. So he left his computer up and I see this document you see in the back. January 1st, 1829. I just looked over and all I saw was, I give my Negro. I was like, what are you giving your Negro? What is this? Can I have it? This is the day that changed my life, is seeing this one document. And I want to read it to you. On January 1st, 1829, 3 siblings, Simon, Edith, and Isham, are sold by Thomas Early to Mary Chirac for $550. The receipt of their sale reads as follows. Thomas Early of Hopkins County in state of Kentucky, for and in consideration of the sum of $550 paid by Mary Chirac of the county of Bertie County in state of North Carolina. The receipt whereof is hereby acknowledged, and himself therewith fully satisfied, hath bargained and sold, delivered unto the said Mary Chirac, the 3 Negroes, one boy by the name of Simon, about 11 years of age, and one girl by the name of Edith, about 7 of age. One boy about 3 years of age by the name of Isham is to have and hold the said Negroes, Simon the elder, Edith and Isham, to the fair Mary Chirac and her heirs forever. Assigned, sealed, and delivered in the presence of Whitmell T. Chirac, state of North Carolina, Bertie County Court, February term, 1829. This bill of sale from Thomas Early to Mary Chirac was acknowledged in open court by the said Early and ordered to be registered. How many people can find the day they turned into their surname? But when you read a document like this, there's so much information. You could spend a long time just on this document. It not only told me that Mary bought my family in 1829, so I became Chirac in 1829, but who did she buy me from? Early. My last name was Early. So I'll reintroduce myself to you all. My name is Joyce Renee Boone Early Chirac Jenkins, Gill, Bazemore, and Watson Cole. When I research my family, those are all my names. So when you're researching as an African American, you have to go back, spend the time to figure out how you became your name. Naming patterns are very important. Why did your family choose that name? My family kept the name of the last person that enslaved one of my ancestors. Because he only had daughters, all his daughters married, they became Gill, Bazemore, Watson. So grandpa's a Gill, grandma's a Chirac, auntie's a Bazemore. We split up. I'm going to sit down because I want you to not pay attention as much to me, but I want you to pay attention to that house you just saw. Actually, I'm going to go back a little bit. This is the house. This is the Chirac plantation. This is where my family was enslaved. This is on the cover of a book called Northeastern North Carolina. That is my family on the left, the enslavers on the right. So I wanted to find that house. So it's not always an ancestry.com account that's going to cost you $60 a month. For me, it was Google. I Googled the name. They had some Hope plantation that just, the South is very, let's talk about this for a minute. The South, I have learned to love in terms of the acceptance of what happened in the South. They do not shy away from it. I have been around descendants of slave owners, and they're fine. Yes, daddy owned slaves. This is how many. Do you need the records? Are you searching? Just a matter of fact. And it is harder for me in the North researching because we have this stigma here. Oh, no, never in the North. So it's harder actually for me to research the North than it is the South. Go figure. So this is the family that owned my family, and that's the house in the background. The house is exactly the same today. So I went. Sometimes it takes being on a pilgrimage. So for me, I went because a little girl in the 4th grade that watched everybody go down south, I needed to go down south, finally. So I made it. That's me on the porch. So most people would not be smiling to go to the enslaved family house, but I was. This was healing. This was answers. And if you see the bag in my hand, I took as much dirt as I could to put it in little vials, and I came back and gave it to every single person in my family. And they cherish that dirt. That dirt goes, that's everybody's house on the mantle. If you know older Black people, their mantle is precious. You're not putting anything on there. They have not organized, and that Black dirt is organized, and you can't touch it. So when you're thinking about this, that same porch that my family could not freely walk on if they could, I just went on there like I own the land. And I was able to sit there. My own time, move when I wanted to, walk through the house when I felt like it. And all of these people that were not Black, they were all white, were there just to help me. It felt good. And I wailed uncontrollably when I got there. It was very weird. I was fine on the way there. And the first thing they said was, "Joyce, what do you want to see first?" And I just bawled. And they let me have my moment. I just could not stop crying. And my husband was like, just leave her. Just leave her. I felt so surrounded by them. I felt like I was picking them up and bringing them home, even though they had already left. So that trip redefined the thought process and the research process for me. So what you're going to do, how many of you already love history? When you do it through the lens of your family, you completely fall in love with history again because you see yourself as a part of it. We fought in every single war this country fought in. Why wouldn't you be proud when you find their military records and you see how they fought for a country that didn't love them back, but fought as valiantly as people that were treated nicely? That's pride. I love it. I love finding their records. So the one thing you're going to have to learn is the nuances of slavery. There are things you have to understand in order to find your family. What happened in slavery? How were you passed along in slavery? A lot of people think it was the auction block and they turned you around, and that did happen, but it was not the only way. You could have been inherited. If someone died, you saw the will, Mary Chirac she bought, but I'll show you later her will where she knows she's dying and she leaves all the slaves to different people in the family. And it always ends with, "and their heirs forever." It's so you know they never leave the possession of that family unless they sell them by deed of sale. So remember, they said, you're never documented, but your property. You're so valuable that they document you and buy you by deed. So when I talk to kids, I tell them, you have the head down. My family was a slave. So what your family were skilled workers. The women delivered children. You go to school for a very long time to do that now. Your great-great-grandmother was brilliant. She came to this land, she did not understand the language, and she came under duress, and she cultivated the land, took care of their children, took care of our families, and she made it so you're here. Grandma was amazing. Grandpa was strong. He knew how to build. Architects get paid a lot of money. Grandpa built that just off of his knowledge in Africa. They built, they cultivated, they learned under stress. I don't like being under stress 10 minutes at work. I could not imagine that stress in building a country. So, as I said, can inherit, purchase. You could have been collateral for a loan, or you could have been loaned out. A lot of times, slave owners that needed to make money will send out their skilled slaves and make money off of them. Every once in a while, the slave got a little kickback, and that was the really skilled ones. But for the most part, the plantation owner made money off of our families, but there's paperwork. That's why you have to follow them. Deed of sale, wills, tax records, personal papers are my favorite. Everyone ever hear of North Carolina, Chapel Hill? How many of you know your families from the South? Maybe North Carolina? Chapel Hill has amazing collections. I found in Chapel Hill the Chirac collection, and they wrote about all of my family during the Civil War. My great grandfather, who was last name was Outlaw at the time, hid the man that owned my family's wealth during the Civil War because he was on the wrong side. And he hid his wealth under collard greens. And he told him, I went to school with the Union General. I want you to break the line and I want you to go get him, bring him to our house so I could save my land because he knows me. They won't decimate my property if I could just get him here. So my Black great grandfather goes to the Union line and says, I need to deliver this to the general. And they said, we'll take it. He said, I can't give it to you. He told me I have to put it in his hand myself. And they broke the line and let him through. Can you imagine it? It's all written in his paper. So grandpa goes through the line, gives it to the Union General. The Union General accepts. And my grandpa leads this entire battalion to his house. They go to dinner. And the general says, my men can stay outside and sleep. I'll sleep in your nice, lavish house. And the general said, no, I'm sorry. The man that owned my family said, you stay in the house. The general told him, I sleep with my men. So they all slept outside, but they left their property alone. Because grandpa, when they came back, grandpa put all his silver and it planted collard greens on top of it. It was his garden. But had I not looked or known who owned my family, I would not have been able to research their papers to find my family. So you're going to get to learn them almost as good as you're going to know your own family. And it's important. I want to know who they were too. What were my family circumstances because of you? How did you treat them? What kind of money did you have? Who were you in the community? Mr. Chirac was Whitmill Chirac was a pastor, but he was very respected in the community. And at the end of slavery, a lot of slaves, when it was time to be sharecroppers, preferred to go to his plantation because he was known for being a fair man. In researching my family, a lot of my family members named people after Whitmill. That's where the name came from. We talked about briefly the Freedmen's Bureau. So it was established after the war. You have all of these freed African Americans that now need to be acclimated into life. And they did take care of poor whites as well. But they needed food, they needed education, they needed job training. So one of the parts of being free was you could work for wages. They were not supposed to take free labor from you. Work agreements are documents that you can find. Please write that down. Look for work agreements. And after this, I'll show you what one actually looks like. I'll pass it around. In one of the work agreements, someone got paid in a barrel of corn. So in this, one of the wonderful things that the Freedmen's Bureau did was legitimize marriages. Something we don't really think about is a piece of property can't get married. That's a contract. So they had what they call slave marriages on the plantations during the time of slavery. They were acknowledged amongst ourselves, but not legal documents. So they would get married at the blessing of the plantation owner. Jump in the broom is the ceremony, but we need to understand why that was, because they could not legally be married. But at the time of the Freedmen's Bureau, people were running to legitimize their marriages. But at the same time, this is when they were able to select a last name. Imagine being 50 years old and it's the first time you're like, I'm so excited, I can be a person and pick a name. So the naming was interesting. Where'd your name come from? Did it have anything to do with who owned you? Did your family say, I don't want anything to do with this anymore? Freed men is freed man. It has nothing to do with who owned you. It was you didn't want anything to do with it. But was the person freedman? How the names were chosen. The last name of the person that owned your family, was it a previous owner that you liked? And I've seen every case of this. Did you interchange the names? In a census, the first census, 1870, my great-great-grandmother, she was Watson. Next census, she was Chirac. The next census, she was back to Watson. And then finally, she stuck with Chirac. I guess she was trying the names out, see which one she liked. But she swapped. Adoption of a new name. And a lot of times you'll see Black people with the last name Washington, Jefferson, Jackson. They chose the names of national leaders, presidents. They love that. The occupational skill, a place of residence, a color. This is the first time you were a person. Who do you want to be called? Imagine how empowering it was for a Black man to be able to be in charge of his own family. And the first order of business is, I'm claiming my wife and my kids, and I'm picking our name. So the document that you're looking for is called cohabitation record. This is a cohabitation record of my grandma and grandpa, Freeland Chirac and Margaret Chirac. If people were looking, they would think they were marrying cousins. They are not. If you were on the Chirac plantation and someone was labeling you with a last name, Chirac was it, so they knew what plantation you were on. And it says this day before and acknowledge that they have been cohabitating together as man and wife for 3 years. So what does that tell me? It tells me since 1863 is when they slave married. Now you have a date. You see how important every single document tells you a lot. Because Freeland Chirac and Margaret Chirac had the same last name, I know that they didn't live on neighboring plantations. They were on the same because they have the same last name. I now know the person that established this. His name is at the bottom. I know the date that they legitimized their marriage, August 11th, 1866. All of that just from this little piece of paper. Cohabitation records. You see here, same Freeland, his name is Watson. This is that going back and forth in the census documents. This is why it's important that you write everything down, every suspected last name, so you know you're looking at the same people. And if we start from the beginning, start this tree with yourself because you know that information, work your way down so you understand the connections as you go. Sometimes you just want to go back to who came from Africa and what boat, but you have to start with yourself because you know who mom is, you know who grandma is. It may be not because I didn't know, but you know because you connect from yourself down. I want to read to you in 1930, it was Martin Jackson explained why he chose his last name after emancipation. The master's name was usually adopted by a slave after he was set free. This was done more because it was the logical thing to do and the easiest way to be identified than it was the affection for the master. Also, the government seemed to be in a mighty hurry to have us get names. We had to register as someone so we could be citizens. Well, I got to thinking about us all as slaves that was gonna take the name Fitzpatrick. And I made up my mind I'd find me a different one. One of my grandfathers in Africa was called JCO, and so I decided to be Jackson. Naming patterns make a difference. So this is me. These are all my names, y'all. Boone, Early, Jenkins, Chirac, Outlaw, Watson, Gill, Bazemore, Cole. So when I research, I literally research every single one of those names. And I've also taken DNA, and because I did the paperwork, when I now go in, did anyone take an ancestry test? When you go in and see these weird names that make absolutely no sense to you, they make sense to me because I did this work. I know where they belong. I've helped a lot of them connect why we're related because of DNA, because of doing the paperwork. Ancestry has all the databases. You need to do footwork, but it really takes this. The DNA just goes further than the paperwork because your DNA is not going to lie. But it helped for me confirming a lot of the paperwork. Look how long. I was in early for 90 years. That's someone's lifetime. So like I said, this is me, y'all. This is my makeup. Do I look like that? That's me. That's my makeup. It's kind of fun looking at that. But I really was sad when I only saw 4% Ireland when I had attached myself to being Irish. I mean, I was fully committed to my Clottering, Notre Dame, the Irish soda bread and the what's it, the cabbage, the corned beef and cabbage. I was committed. So my mother, you see there, if you add it up, I'm 29% European. So my mother comes in, who I told you is very, very fair skinned. And she goes, tell me how African I am. I was like, well, okay. You're 60% African. She was like, but what's the rest? I was like, European. She's like, what? I would have never known. I said, did you look at yourself, Mom? Like, did you look at yourself? It came from somewhere. But it's very, I don't know. I like this. I think everybody should do it and kind of see what you're made up of. It almost takes away your want to be mad at somebody else. It's hard to be mad at what you are. So that's Whitmel Chirac. So the easiest thing I told you when I started my journey was that he must have did something to one of my grandmothers to make me a Chirac, but that's not true because I found the deed, remember? But because of DNA, now when I went down south, I wasn't by myself. I met his family. We did it together. We spent the entire weekend together. His great-great-granddaughter and me being the great-great-granddaughter of his slaves, we did this journey together. We call each other cousin now, but we don't share any DNA. He did nothing to my family in that way, the biblical way, nothing. But who did? The judge down the street. The judge in town is my great-great-great-grandfather and his brother. I'm gonna come in the middle. I want y'all to hear this. That's the Grand Wizard of the KKK. So my uncle was the Grand Wizard of the KKK, and my grandfather was the prominent judge in town. That's Grandpa. So when I told my mother this, she came up and she said, do I look like him? I said, yes, you do. You look like him. But my bloodline has nothing to do with my last name. I share nothing with Whitmel. I share everything with the judge in town. Because of finding their papers, his son wrote a book called A Far Cry, and he talks about my family. But one chapter, he talks about the insatiable Black woman. So he talks about how these women just, you have to be with a Black woman. They do this, they do that. They will just make you so happy in that way. And I'm reading this book like, sir, you're talking about my grandmother. This is terrible. But they told me nothing was written. As horrible as that is, he was talking about my grandmother, who they said did not have a name, did not have documentation. I have it all. So when you're doing this research, I want to go back to them because it's really important with the slave owners. You're going to find the town that you came from. You're going to find your last name. You're going to find out who's white in that neighborhood. You might get, so I lucked out. Whitman was the only person in Bertie County in Windsor named Chirac. I really lucked out. That name is unique. Sometimes you might be Smith. Sometimes he didn't have any siblings. He might have had 6 brothers. I would have had to research 6 families. You're going to research every single one. So what you're going to do is find the town that you think your family's from, find your last name. If there were a bunch of them, go to the slave census. How many of them own slaves? Then you're going to just start going down each one of them. You're going to do a lot of work, but it's worth it. And you're not always going to yield a bunch of results, but it's going to take one piece of paper to change your life. So something else Whitmill did. Whitmill was obsessed with paperwork. He kept a journal, and he kept a journal of his slaves after slavery, and it was a book of his store. So I found out my grandmother at the end of every week liked whiskey. She would go buy a pint of whiskey at the end of the week. I knew that she would buy my grandpa Jacob a hat and a book so they were allowed to read. All of this because Whitmill kept records. But what else I found was Whitmill's grandson became a prominent painter. And most of his life, until he was about 80 years old, he said he kept a secret that he wanted to let out before he died. And he left a letter. Anyone hear of the museum, the Lynching Museum? I think it's in Alabama. Yes. So there is a museum, and it has these cinder blocks that come from the sky with everyone that was lynched that they have proof of. And one of the cinder blocks is Peter Bazemore. Peter Bazemore was my cousin. Remember, when I told you all my names, one of my names was Bazemore. And in his records, he talks about the lynching of Peter Bazemore and how he was tormented the entire day because he wanted to save him and he just didn't know how. So he said, Peter was living on our land, and this white girl and her husband wanted that house, and they would not leave. So the woman said that she was raped. And so he said, I never raped her, but they started to run after him. This is his words. So he went on the run, and he was a young boy, just a boy. He said, I tried. I went to the bar, and all the people was talking about this young man that they're going to string up. And he said, I don't know what to do. If he does it, then he's a nigger lover. I don't know what to do. So he said, I sat and I stewed, and I finally got the courage to get up off the bar, and I went running down into town, but it was too late. He was already hanging from the tree. He left that letter right before he died. But Peter Bazemore hangs in that. But now I can send Peter's letter, the letter about what happened to him. So he has something. To me, it just brings it full circle, right? Because sometimes they say they did it to themselves. But now I have somebody that saw it and said they did it to them, because I researched every single person in his family. You have to get to know them better than you get to know yourself in the beginning. They make a difference. They were a part of who your family was, what they did, their circumstances, how they lived, where they worked, they cooked for them, they did everything. This plantation that Whitmill was on, he wasn't a huge slave owner. His right-hand man was one of my grandfathers because it was just them. He had a bunch of women in his family. His mother, the men had died off, and it was just the women. He relied heavily on the slaves as his almost business partners. But I only know that because I researched him as hard as I researched myself. Don't forget Grandpa and the Grand Wizard of the KKK. And I know him because his descendants, through my DNA, we talk all the time, and we figure out how it happened. So Grandpa that was hiding things was his son. That's why he was so close to him. He was his driver, but he kept him in a good position because it was his son. Now we understand why mom is 40% European. And did you know that the Chirac name is not even Irish? It's English. I just was lied to all my life. I just lied. So this is not for us all the time. And I make this distinction when people say, did your family immigrate or migrate? My family were hostages. There's a difference. You immigrate and migrate, you come voluntarily, whether you're escaping or whatever, you chose. We were hostages. We migrated around the United States or left. But it's important to know, because you are not all Black anymore, you're not, that if you choose to check out the other parts of your family, which sometimes I do, is to look where they came from, the ship manifest, where if they change their name, if that name that you carry is actually their name, did they shorten it up to make it sound more American? Did they change it around? You have to you got to learn them. You're going to be an expert in the family that owns your family. Naming patterns are essential, even in your Black family. So Chirac has come up as Chirac, Shark, Shirk, Sharik, Shamrick. You're going to look for all variations of your name, because during this time early on, even the census enumerators, the people going door to door to write down who was in the house, a lot of them were illiterate, were just on the cusp of maybe a third grade reading level. So they're phonetically, and if I have a very thick Southern drawl, did you ever hear someone down south, you know absolutely nothing of what they say? I knew someone from Florida in college, knew nothing of what he said. I just smiled. Oh, you're so funny. Knew nothing. So sometimes they write what they think they hear, so it translates into the documents. If someone in your family is in the military, those documents are amazing. Has anyone tried to gain back information from the military through the National Archives? Did you have a hard time? Okay, you went through the National Archives? Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna teach you something different. I'm gonna give you this form. There is a short form. It's so quick that you can send the National Archives, and you are entitled to more of their military service. And if you are a direct descendant, you are entitled to recover their medals. I did that. I have my grandfather's medals. I got it from my mom. So now I have a shadow box with all his stuff. So you can take the information, you're going to take the ancestry.com information, which will have like the A number, and you're going to put it on this little form I'm going to tell you about to change all your lives. You're going to make the National Archives sick. Sorry, National Archives. I literally sent them an application every Monday morning. I had things coming from them all the time. I think they probably blocked me, but I have a binder, and I'm not exaggerating. I was going to bring it, but it's too heavy. Full of all of my family service, all of it. So if you are a cousin or a niece, you are entitled to as much as FOIL will allow you, but that tells you what, where they served, where they were stationed, what medals they got, because if you want to create a shadow box, although you can't get it for free, those medals are cheap to buy. You can create it. As African Americans, you're building your family's history. So the military service, come on, everybody knows that everyone's very proud of military service, and we all should be. But you can rebuild it by just this one little form that I'm gonna show you, and we can send everyone a link, right, later that registered? Okay, and I'll send you this form. It's one page, send it. You'll be amazed what you get back in the mail. On Ancestry, when you're doing the military records, you also see the pension records. The pension records tell you who the wife was, who the kids were, where they lived, where they're stationed, who owned them. It is a trough of information. This work is not easy. It takes years. But it is so worth it. You have to be really invested in wanting to do this, but who doesn't want to learn about themselves? It's so worth the effort. So there's a myth buster I wanted to give, because a lot of times people ask me that when people came through an immigration that the officials changed their names. They did not. They didn't do it. Most people changed their own names, said they were someone else. But when they left the country of origin, they had to tell everything. They had to tell where they were going, how much money was on their person, where they were going, the address, why they're going to that person's house, where they're going to be when they get there. They had to tell everything. So by that information, now you know, well, that has to be a family member. And when you're looking at a ship manifest and you find grandpa, look at everybody on the manifest, because most likely grandpa's not traveling alone. Community research is important because we all go places where we know people. And sometimes you have to research the whole street to find your family. Give you an example. Say Bob Jones is your grandfather. You know he lives in New Rochelle. He lives on one particular street, but for some reason you can't find him in the 1940 census. But you did find him in 1930, and you did find him in 1950, and you know he lived in that house. If you knew who his neighbors were because you researched the street, and maybe grandpa's name was not legible and the technology didn't pick his name up, research the person that lived next door. Grandpa's name might have been spelled wrong. Grandma's name might have been there. So become familiar with everybody on the street, even if it's just simply their name. Because most likely you're going to find something else about them. Who researches newspapers? Utilize newspapers. So newspapers.com. I like free stuff. FultonHistory.com. FULTON. History.com is free. All of these New York newspapers, you will find your family. So if your family's name is Bob Jones, you're going to put in quotes, quote, Bob Jones, end the quote, the word and, put a space, and, then inside quotes, put New Rochelle. Fill in your information, obviously, and hit search and thank me tomorrow, because you'll be up until tomorrow. Okay. So that is all I have there. I like to leave a lot of room for questions and even to show you some of ancestry. And it's enough about my own family. So this is my fourth great grandmother, Edith. You remember the slave receipt? You heard Edith? That was my fourth great grandmother. And you see here, I put actively researching. She was born into slavery and she's a direct ancestor. Any questions before I move on? Okay. So, like I said, I always start with myself, right? You start with yourself, you start with what you know. I knew my mother's name, I knew my grandfather's name. So this comes from my grandfather. So I knew my grandfather's name. I never knew his mother's name. So they knew their mother's name, obviously. So I had the living relative tell me the mother. Once I found the mother, I went down into the records in North Carolina and I started with whatever records were available, whatever mentions their mother's name. So she had a delayed birth certificate. Does anybody know what a delayed birth certificate is? Okay, birth certificates were not required forever. We think it is because it's commonplace for us, but they were not always mandatory. Wherever your family lived, find out when vital records became commonplace. And that's when you start to look. So delayed ones for it, she lived in North Carolina, Bertie, did not require birth certificates when she was born. So when things switched over and she needed Social Security and so forth, she needed a birth certificate, a proof of her birth. She had to go back to North Carolina and get what they called a delayed birth certificate, which means she needed an affidavit of someone that can say, yes, she was born on this date in this place. And that's what you get, a delayed birth certificate. So in her delayed birth certificate was her mother's name and her father's name. So I used that. And then I'm able to just keep pecking away and through the plantation owner, the records I did have, because my enslaved grandfather that came from North Carolina died at Ossining. I knew his name, but my mother didn't. It's only because I did this research. So I was able to go back and back until I found them. Any other questions? Don't be shy. If you have a question about your own research, also ask that, because we'll look. I want to show you Fulton history so you can see what I'm talking about. Is someone here an old New Rochelle family? Okay. Give me someone's name. A first name, though. D-O-E. And last name? D-O-D. D-R-O-O-K. And his last name, Bleak? W. And New Rochelle, right? Everyone sees how I'm doing this, right? For the online people, you see how I'm doing this, right? Okay. And then I'm simply going to push search. And we're going to see if anything comes up. There are 5 articles with those search criteria in here. So it's going to look for New Rochelle, and it's going to look for his name. So I'm just trying to figure out where his name is highlighted here. And then we're going to go, there it is. Okay. There's a method to my madness, people. Just give me a second. Is that where he lived? Serpentine Drive? Okay, so y'all can't see it, but the smile on her face right now, and there's a reason why I asked for someone in the audience, because it takes one document to suck you in. If you just find one thing about your relative will change your life. Imagine not knowing anything about someone for 50, 80 years, and one day you get to see something about them. But what she learned from this is she can confirm it because of the address. She now sees his name. What was he doing? Oh. So let's see what else they got going on. I also like looking at the oldest stuff. 66. Let's see what's going on at 66. Is that a picture? Oh, look at this. Harold Miller was handsome. Look at him. Okay. You see it? He was the master. If you could see the smile on her face. I just need y'all all to see the smile on her face. I'm sorry, I'm embarrassing, but it's the smile for me. Just the newspapers alone searching for your family, it's really inspiring to see your family doing stuff in the community. It also will inspire you to maybe do more if you don't do a lot, and make you feel like you have a responsibility to continue that legacy of community work. For kids in the high school, I had a young man that never knew his grandfather. He played football. When he first started the exercise with me, he looked a little defeated, but then he saw his grandfather was a star football player in Tarrytown. He took my computer. I'm short. This big boy, I couldn't get my computer back. I felt like I needed to be a wrestler to get it back. But the pure joy on his face, and he starts screaming, I get it from my grandfather. This is why I'm good at football. We all want connection. Just as human condition, we want to feel connected. We want to feel loved. We want to feel important. We want to feel a part of the greater context of the community, of the world that we took part in it. And this is a step in finding out where you fit. Anybody else? Anybody else want to try? Okay. So that's Fulton history. That's free. You're also going to do FamilySearch.org. It's free. FultonHistory.com. And I'll send you a link. I'll send a whole sheet of resources for you, which will include the link to the National Archives for the military records. There are also databases online that you can search for the A number, which was the military enlistment number. They have one for Westchester County that you can search it free. I'm gonna send you a lot of free, okay? Okay. Mm-hmm. So for you, so first of all, Alabama was hard slavery. That's another thing you're going to want to research is what kind of slavery did your family take part in? Deep South had very long days and it was warm most of the time. So they could put them in the field longer and throughout the year more because they didn't experience the winters like we do. That was hard slavery. So for you, I would do newspapers.com. Unfortunately, you do have to pay for that. Genealogy Bank, those are things. But I don't know what the library offers. Some things you can go to the libraries that for research purposes are free. But Fulton may or may not have a lot for Alabama. It's usually more New York centered. But I would do newspapers.com for Alabama. But I would also for Alabama do familysearch.org. Freedmen's Bureau Records. Yep, that's on Family Search. Freedmen's Bureau Records. Any other questions? Yes. Absolutely. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Barbara. That's okay. And that's good to know because also the New York Age is on Fulton, but you would have a more comprehensive collection here. Yes. Freedmen's Bureau. You could do that on familysearch.org and that's free. Have you ever heard of the Research Wiki? So the wiki, I'm gonna put this down. Stand on the wrong place. The Family Search Research Wiki is amazing. So sometimes Africans, people of African descent were dropped off in Jamaica, in the Caribbean. Some were dropped off in other Spanish-speaking places. They were dropped off here. So it's important to know, Ancestry does have a lot of Caribbean records, but if you come to the Research Wiki and you put anything, you see it? It'll tell you where, it'll give you a link inside of there and other places that you can access the documents that you want. The Research Wiki on Family Search is amazing. You can search by country, you could search by topic, vital records in New York. And it also gives you a history. Remember, I told you vital documents were not always a necessity. You would find that it wasn't a requirement for each municipality. So you would find from the Research Wiki when it was. You're going to learn history in such a different way, but you're going to fall in love with it because it's through your family's eyes. Any other questions? Yes. Are we cousins? Yes. There's something called endogamy. So where, and this happens in the Jewish community, anywhere where people live in ghettoized, right? Where they're all so let's talk about, remember I talked about the nuances of slavery. You couldn't roam freely. All the people in one area were with everybody else. That's why you have what they call double cousins or double related. So our DNA will sometimes look very much alike. And we were all being taken from similar regions or the same region. So we were related. We might be cousins. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. I'm not as well versed in that because I haven't finished enough of my research here to try Africa. So for me, I'm not ready for that research because I need to perfect the people that were here to be confident that the people there are the people I'm looking for. Yes. Absolutely. I've helped in class. Is it Jamaica? There you go. Get to that research wiki, tells you what you can find and where you're going to find it. And when you sign up for that account, it's free. And you could do that from home. Ancestry does have vital records for Jamaica because I found it for a few of the students in my class. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Would it be possible for you to repeat the questions from the audience for the folks at home?
Sure, I'm sorry. So one of the audience members wanted to know about research in Jamaica. So you would go to the research wiki on familysearch.org and put in Jamaica. You're going to put anything. You're going to put Antigua. You're going to put Jamaica. You could put Ecuador. You could put anything you want, and it's going to tell you what resources are available for whatever region that you put in. Any other questions? Yes. Mhm. Mhm. No. Mhm. Mhm. It, so the person that sold the land in the deed, we don't know who that person is. Did you build a tree for that person? So now your search is that person. So family, we don't know. And because we're talking about a long time ago, because grandma was 100, her grandfather, her father, I mean, we're now talking about slavery, right? So I'm wondering if this was the white person at the end of their life given land and that happened, or is it a relative? So you're going to build a tree on that person to figure out who they are. Find out who they are. Get my email address and we're going to find out who they are. I'm curious. This is how I go down rabbit holes. I get sucked up into all y'all lives. And but I want to tell you to do one thing. If you leave here with anything outside of the resources, is identify the question that you have and take this one question at a time. This is overwhelming work because you're like, who's grandpa? Who's grandpa? Who's the person that gave the house? Who's this? Who's that? Your head will blow off and you will never sleep again. You need to go, it's a research question. Once you get the answer to the first research question, move on to the next research question. My first research question was, who was my great grandmother? I got that, moved on to the next question. You'll feel a lot more accomplished than saying who was my entire family. Your head's gonna blow off. Take one question at a time. Any other questions?
Can we do a question from one of our virtual participants?
Yes.
So this is a very specific question
Okay.
and a very interesting question. So I'll just read it verbatim. Do you have any tips for researching families who were enslaved by the Dutch in Columbia County, New York? We've gone back to 1790, but have not been able to go back further. Many of the enslaved have Dutch surnames.
So first of all, 1790 is amazing to get back to as an African American. I got back to 1715, so I felt good. So what you're going to do, this person is going to call state archives. You're going to ask state archives what is in their collections. Then you will call the municipality in which the family was enslaved. You're going to ask them what they have on collection, and you start asking and getting on your foot and the phone, figure out what each person has in their collection for you to further your research work. You got to do a lot of calling. You got to do a lot of asking, what's in your collection? Then you expand your research. So maybe you just found out your grandmother's name and you found out she lives in, whatever county. Now you got to research that county and figure out what's going on. What kind of work did they do? How many of you looked at a census document and really looked at the census document? What jobs did they have? I did research for a woman. I gave her the census document. She was like, oh, my grandmother worked, my uncle was working and he did something called CCC. I was like, what? I was like, that's the Civilian Conservation Corps. You are a big part of history. I'm gonna need you to go now learn about the New Deal. Now she's like, oh my God, tells people that story everywhere she goes now. She feels so a part of history. Every single line in there. Was your family a homeowner? It's in the census document. Did they own or did they rent? Were they literate or were they not? Where did they work? Who did they work for? How many kids? This is a good thing. In the census document, particularly 1910, 20, my grandma tells how many kids she had and then how many are living at the time she did it. I have told so many people like, oh, you had a brother. What? I had a brother? Yeah, here's his death certificate. So one woman I told that to, she came and brought her older brother's ashes up. Okay, this is illegal. I'm sorry, this is being recorded. But we were at the cemetery and I was like walking away from her because she starts pouring into I was like, oh my God, I can't be a part of this. But it does a lot of healing. Did you have any more questions online?
There's one more. Any tips for adoptees?
Okay, that's very specific. Adoptees would be one, if you are comfortable. I do not push DNA on anybody. That is a personal choice. But if I was adopted, I would first start there. And then there are a lot of specific online places, Google genealogy for adoptees. There's specializations in every genealogist. My specialty is African American research. Some people are specialized in adoption because they're connected to adoption, right? They got so passionate about it. I got passionate about everybody, but particularly Black, because they told me I couldn't. There's something about doing something somebody tells you you can't do. Any other questions up there? Yes. Mhm. 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 Okay. Mhm. So that I'm glad you brought that up and thank you for sharing. This is not for everybody. And everybody is not a willing participant in this. This is very personal. I have elders in my family that yell at me all the time, or I call and the first thing they say is, "Would you find out?" I don't want to know. It's not for everybody. This was personal for me, but for the every one person I had that doesn't want to hear it, I have 20 that do. So for someone that's adopted, if they're comfortable, I would recommend DNA because your DNA tells everything. And that's just why I brought this up. Your DNA, there, if you take the DNA, you get your genetic makeup, your heritage, but there's also something called the cousins list. And this comes with your ancestry search, right? So I'm gonna tell you a deeply personal story. I know it's on TV. So I did mine. My father was not my father. That man raised me my entire life, and that was not my father. Yes. Yep. So my biological father was not my biological father, but because I understand how to read this, I called my mom. You got something you want to tell me? That's exactly what I said to her. It was not a pleasant 15 minutes after that, but we got over it. Yeah, it wasn't pleasant. So I want to teach you something about this, right? When you're looking at your cousins list, close family comes up. 932 centimorgans is a lot. You're looking at the centimorgans, the CM number, it's the percentage of DNA. This is a lot of centimorgans. And if you click on it, it will tell you what that relationship may mean, right? Helps you to narrow down the relationship between you and the person in there. So if you get a few people in there and you're trying to figure out, oh, how's this person related? This helps you start figuring out what the relationship possibly can be. I knew nothing of this person. Because of this, someone reached out to me and I'm in touch with him now. It's from my father's side that I know nothing about. Yes. The centimorgans is the segments of DNA, like the strain of DNA is how much of it you share with other people. It's the pieces. It's so interesting when you think of yourself as all these pieces, right? So if you can have, if your mother had 3 kids, literally your DNA is like this, and it's what you're gonna come up with. So you can have three siblings. It's not gonna match exactly. You're gonna have something your brother has. He's gonna have something you don't have. This one's gonna have more mom, and this one's gonna have more dad. It's actually pretty interesting when you look at yourself with your family and see how everybody's shaking up. My brother shares more of my mother. I share more of this man. I don't know who he is. I knew it though. I told her I didn't look like her. So Ancestry has a new thing now where they separate it for you. They'll tell you what's your maternal and what's your paternal side. So they help you along. It's a little bit more intuitive than it was initially. So just to give you a comparison, I'm going to show you my mother's DNA and then my brother's. So you see my mom, it's 3,000, right? You're half of your parents, but it's not even an equal half. Like I said, sometimes you might have a little more dad, maybe a little more mom. And then you see my brother, who I thought was my full brother. If anything broke my heart, that boy that's my son. He calls me Sissy Mommy. When I found out he was my half brother, I was so dramatic. I'm not usually dramatic. No, I lied. I'm dramatic. So I like slid on the floor, the whole dramatic thing. And my husband was like, get up. Like, you're doing a lot. But if you see this, you'll understand. So it helps you with the people you know, right? To make a comparison if these people are really closely related. So I know my mom, I shared 3,000. My half brother is 1,000. I just showed you a man that was 900. You see how now it's like, who is he? Okay. I know Nell, she lives upstairs from my mom. I know she's my first cousin. So when you get someone that says 900, find them. Find them. They're that closely related. So the Centimorgan number tells you how closely related they are to you. The higher the number, the more close they are in your relation. That number means something. So that's DNA. Anybody have a question about the DNA? Any other questions at all? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So I can't give you a definite number of accuracy, but it's easy to discover because they're not putting any personal information, they're putting municipal information. So you can easily confirm, do you have these documents? Because those links are taking you to those people, it's not taking you to them. So they do take some care in populating good information. So Family Search is done by the Mormons. Part of the Mormons' work is doing this work because they believed in baptizing posthumously, because they believe that all family has to be baptized so that you all see each other in the afterlife. This is very important to them. It just helps us because we are benefiting from their church work, but they do good work in putting very accurate information up. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. What's your question? What is your genealogical question? That is the first thing you're going to do to organize yourself. What do you want to know? Okay. And then you're going to first visit. So say if it's your grandmother's names, you're going to sit down and you're going to write a research, like a report of how you're going to attack this. If I want to know, I'm going to go to the cemetery. And I didn't tell y'all about, we need another hour. So we need to go to the cemetery. The cemetery has amazing stuff on the stones themselves. And if you're good, go to the office and ask them because they have more stuff inside. But for you, my answer is first, identify the first question you have. And then figure out a plan of attack and how you're going to do that. Is it, I want to go find vital documents that will support this? Is it a death certificate that will support this answer where I'll get the answer? Then you start to collect. So if it's for John Doe, we're going to go look for vital documents for John Doe. We're going to look for military records for John Doe. We're going to look for yearbooks. Yearbooks are amazing. If you've never seen someone, and this was the time yearbooks were invented, I have yearbooks back to early 1900s in Austin where I've been able to see people. So you're gonna look for all the things for John Doe. You're gonna keep a file for him only, very organized, but we're not gonna go down a rabbit hole. We're gonna just answer that one question, and it's very hard not to go down a rabbit hole. It's like, I wanna know his birthday. Oh my God, he was in the military, and then you're this way. Grab the military record you saw, document where you found it, put it to the side. Answer the one question. I have kids, I do the same thing you do. There are very few nights that I went back to work and I'm like this at my desk, I can't do that. Okay, so very specific. It's called identifying your research question. You might have 500, but you're gonna take them one at a time. You're welcome. Anything else? Well, I thank you all for listening to me ramble. Okay. Thank you very much. And happy searching. And if you do need me, we'll share my email address as historian@villageofossining.org. I'm happy to help. Yeah.